When we talk about Hector and Achilles, we are not referring to chronicles or archaeological finds that testify to real commanders or kings. We are not dealing with living people who breathe the dust of ancient battlefields, but with characters born of words. These figures are the central characters of Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, a grandiose work created in the 8th century BC. Their strength, their valor, their destinies, all of this is nothing more than the product of mythology, skillfully woven by the great poet. Homer wove Achilles into the fabric of this ancient narrative, making him the embodiment of almost divine power and unbridled fury. His image is as if forged from lightning, bringing destruction and inevitable doom to his enemies. On the other hand, Hector is presented as the quintessence of the nobility of the defender of Troy, the embodiment of duty and courage, standing guard over his city and family. His strength is not only physical power, but also unshakable will, honor, and self-sacrifice. Attempts to measure their physical superiority outside the context of the poem, like comparing the power of a racing car engine to the endurance of a racehorse, are simply meaningless. As experts in classical philology and mythology point out, the existence of these heroes is limited to the lines of the epic, not the dusty volumes of historical chronicles. They left behind no graves or traces on the battlefield that could be studied. Their lives unfolded on the pages, not on real earth. Their greatness is the greatness of artistic images designed to convey certain ideas and emotions, not factual parameters. And yet, despite their literary nature, the Iliad gives us an unambiguous answer to the question of who prevailed in their decisive battle. At the climax of the poem, at the very walls of Troy, a duel takes place that has become one of the most famous in world literature. It was not just a clash between two great warriors, it was an act of revenge. Achilles went into battle driven by fierce anger, avenging the death of Patroclus, his closest friend and comrade, who had been killed by Hector. In this fateful battle, Homer leaves the reader in no doubt as to Achilles' superiority. He describes the moment with striking clarity and ruthlessness. Thus Achilles struck Hector. This outcome not only confirms Achilles' physical strength, but also emphasizes his almost demigod status. After all, his mother, the goddess Thetis, made him invulnerable except for one single spot. And, of course, the driving force behind his devastating attack was his unbridled anger, which gave him superhuman strength and determination. Nevertheless, even in the face of inevitable defeat, Hector is portrayed as a brave and worthy opponent. He did not flinch, he did not flee, he accepted the challenge, knowing that his chances of victory were minimal. His willingness to fight to the end, defending his city and his people, even when all seemed lost, makes him a truly heroic figure. His death evokes deep sympathy in the reader, adding an indescribable tragedy to his image. This is not just the death of a villain, it is the fall of Troy's last bastion, a defender who gave everything for his home. Hector's death becomes a symbol of the end of an era, a harbinger of the destruction of a great city. As the sun sank in the west, bathing the battlefield in crimson light, Hector's last breath marked not only the end of a great duel, but also predetermined the outcome of a long war. The ancient Greeks did not read historical works in our modern sense, did not check dates, and did not analyze archives. Their collective memory, their understanding of the past, especially that heroic age, was nourished by completely different sources. Epic poems passed down by word of mouth and then recorded. These works, such as the Iliad, were not just entertainment. They served as a repository of cultural values, ideals of heroism, ideas about divine will, and the inevitability of fate. Long before Homer put these stories into written form, they had lived for centuries in the oral tradition, passed down from rhapsode to rhapsode. Each new performance could bring its own nuances, enhancing the dramatic effect and refining the images, but without striving for protocol accuracy. After all, the main goal was not to record facts, but to comprehend great events and characters. That is why archaeological excavations on the hill of Gisarlik, where the legendary Troy is believed to have been located, although they confirmed the existence of a large settlement that was repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt, did not provide direct evidence of the very war described in the poem. This only emphasizes once again that what we have before us is not a historical account, but a magnificent mythological epic. It was against this mythological backdrop that the greatest battle unfolded. The clash between Achilles and Hector was not simply a confrontation between two mortals. It was permeated by the intervention of the gods, which only served to emphasize its fatality and grandeur. At the decisive moment, Zeus himself, Lord of Olympus, raised the golden scales on which the fates of the heroes lay. And Hector's bull sank, signifying his inevitable doom, a sign that even the bravest mortals are powerless in the face of divine judgment. The goddess Athena, Achilles' constant protector, also played a decisive role. She appeared to Hector in the guise of his own brother Deiphobus, persuading him to stop and accept the fight, promising her support. When Hector rushed at the enemy, Athena disappeared, depriving him of false hope and leaving him alone with the enraged Achilles. This betrayal, albeit divine, dealt a deep psychological blow, leaving Hector without allies at the most critical moment. Even Apollo, who had saved Hector from death many times before, abandoned him this time, obeying the will of Zeus. All these details indicate that Achilles' victory was not only the result of his personal strength, but also divine predestination, which only reinforced his aura as a demigod. After Hector fell, he turned to Achilles with a final plea to give him his body for a proper burial. But Achilles, blinded by grief and thirst for revenge for Patroclus, cruelly refused. He committed an act of unprecedented desecration. Tying the fallen hero's body to his chariot, he dragged it around the walls of Troy in front of all the inhabitants, and then drove it around Patroclus's grave. This barbaric act, demonstrating the depth of Achilles' anger and grief, was not only an act of personal revenge, but also a public humiliation of an entire city. From the city walls came the piercing cries of King Priam and Queen Hecuba, who were watching the terrible scene. Their grief, the grief of the entire people, was immeasurable. It was not just the end of one man, it was the beginning of the end for all of Troy. The death of Hector, as the last bastion of defense, heralded the imminent fall of the great city. Thus, a single duel, filled with divine will and human passions, became a harbinger of ultimate collapse. The idea that the ancient Greeks were afraid to admit the truth about Achilles' superiority or Hector's defeat is, in essence, a modern misunderstanding, a kind of projection of our own ideas about accuracy and historical authenticity onto a completely different cultural paradigm. For the Hellenes, the inhabitants of the city-states that stretched from the shores of the Aegean Sea to distant colonies, the Iliad was not just a book. It was a living heritage, the foundation of their education, morality, and self-awareness. It was Greek culture that created, carefully preserved, and, most importantly, canonized this epic poem, making it the cornerstone of their civilization. Homer's poem not only did not hide the outcome of the duel, but also described it openly, without concealment. From their earliest years, listening to the songs of the rhapsodes, the children of Hellas knew that Achilles was invincible, and that Hector, for all his greatness, was destined to fall by his hand. There was no place in this story for fear of admitting the truth, because this truth was part of their mythological reality, their deeply rooted belief system. They were not afraid of it, they were proud of it. Achilles was revered as the greatest warrior, the embodiment of heroic fury, strength, and destiny, which led him to a glorious but short life. His power was almost divine, and his anger was a force capable of crushing armies.
At the same time, Hector was no less revered. He became a symbol of heroic resistance, the ideal defender of his homeland and his family. His defeat did not diminish his valor. It only emphasized the tragedy of his fate and the inevitability of divine judgment. His image served as an example of duty, courage, and willingness to give his life for his people. The Greeks, glorifying Achilles for his invincible strength, valued Hector no less for his humanity, his self-sacrifice, and his willingness to accept the inevitable. Their traditions openly pass down this story without hiding Hector's defeat. In schools, at celebrations, in everyday conversations, echoes of the Iliad could be heard everywhere. The outcome of the duel served not only as a dramatic climax, but also as a profound lesson about fate and valor. It taught that even the greatest heroes cannot escape their destiny, that honor lies not only in victory, but also in accepting defeat with dignity. This lesson was vital for the education of the citizens of the city-states, for the formation of their worldview. For them, it was not a defeat, but a tragic triumph of the spirit. If the ancient Greeks had no doubts about the outcome of the battle and were not afraid of it, then why does the question of who is stronger, Achilles or Hector, remain relevant and stir minds for thousands of years? The answer lies not in physical strength or historical facts, but in the deep emotional resonance of the images created by Homer and in the universal human themes they embody. Imagine a person who, faced with life's difficulties, is forced to choose between personal ambition and the well-being of their loved ones. It is precisely these dilemmas, embedded in the images of Achilles and Hector, that make them so relatable and understandable. Hector, the defender of his family and city, is often perceived as a more human and tragic hero. He did not choose war for the sake of glory. He was forced to fight to protect his family, his people, and his walls. His motives are understandable to anyone who has ever felt responsible for their loved ones. His farewell to Andromache and his son Astyanact is one of the most poignant moments in the poem, revealing him as a loving husband and father who goes to his death not for personal glory, but for duty. He is a character who evokes sympathy because his struggle is that of a man who, faced with inevitable fate, does not retreat. Achilles, on the other hand, can seem arrogant, even cruel. His strength is blinding, his anger destructive. He fights for personal glory, for kleos, and his refusal to fight, followed by his unbridled rage after the death of Patroclus, show him to be a figure ruled by his passions. His strength is almost superhuman, but his character sometimes seems to lack the warmth and selflessness that are inherent in Hector. He is the embodiment of the heroic ideal, but an ideal that is sometimes repulsive in its intransigence. This dichotomy, masterfully laid out by Homer, reflects the eternal themes of human existence.
It is a conflict between personal glory and duty, between individualism and collective responsibility, between passion and self-sacrifice. Achilles chooses a short but glorious life full of feats, knowing that it will lead to an early death. Hector, on the other hand, chooses a life dedicated to serving his people, even if it means death. Ultimately, the question, who is stronger, Hector or Achilles, grows from a simple comparison of physical abilities into a profound discussion of moral values. It is a question of what is more important, unmatched strength and personal valor, or self-sacrifice, honor, and a willingness to sacrifice oneself for others. It is a discussion about which type of heroism is closer to the human heart. It is this multi-layered nature, this ability of Homer's characters to touch the universal strings of the soul, that explains their enduring relevance over the centuries. And it is not a question of who won, but of what victory means to each of us. In the Iliad, Achilles defeats Hector, asserting his power, and the myth of the Greeks' fear is merely a romanticized delusion. The ancient Greeks did not hide the truth. They celebrated the epic as the foundation of their identity.
Rereading Homer today, we see not a battle of titans, but a timeless exploration of heroism, where both warriors remain symbols of greatness. May their duel continue to inspire as intended by the great poet.